As certified life coaches with 45 years combined experience in human resources, Jen Trumm and Katherine have both experienced the highest of highs and the lowest of lows, both personally and professionally. And what they each know to be true is this: our mental, physical, and emotional health are the essential building blocks in order to thrive and shine in the field of HR. So in a first of its kind podcast, we'll be getting real and to discuss and share what has contributed to both our struggles and successes, with the goal of inspiring women around the globe to stand tall and take the necessary action to both thrive and shine in HR. Here are your hosts, Jen and Katherine.
Welcome to Thrive and Shine HR, episode 21. So excited to dig into this one with Jen today. And Jen, I'm going to catch you totally off guard, because as we were prepping just a few minutes ago for this, we were talking about the fact that we are almost halfway through 2024. So I am curious, what has been your greatest success so far this year?
Oh my gosh. Well, we started this podcast this year, if you think about it. So in terms of greatest success, it definitely is what we have been able to create.
Oh, I love it.
And thinking about that, we are, literally within a couple of days of ending the first half of this year. What a huge accomplishment this first half of this year has been.
Huge.
So yeah, I mean, that's a hands down easy one for me. And in terms of then where that might be evolving and continuing to grow, it's only filled with excitement of that. But I think I look back on the first 20 I did just a couple of days ago, kind of going through, and I was putting together a couple of notes just on a couple of social media posts I want to do, don't forget episode 2, and don't forget episode. It's amazing. It's amazing, the different types of content we've been able to cover in the last 6 months, and going from forgiveness and burnout and stress and all the huge gamut that you don't see talked about in the HR field very often at all, outside of your Empower Hour and other things along those lines, but otherwise doesn't exist. So what a beautiful thing that we've created, and a thing that we continue to build. So yeah, that was an easy one. How about you? Where do you?
And that wasn't even intentional. I really didn't know where you were going to go. But yeah, I mean, I am with you. I think the podcast has been an absolute highlight of the year. 100%. It's been so fun. And I think, one of the underlying lessons for me has been just consistency is so key in maintaining health. We talk about the whole purpose of this podcast. It's really getting real about our mental, our physical health, and our emotional health. And just the consistency of the podcast really has informed this unanticipated reflection practice in my life. Because every week when I'm preparing for the episode, I'm looking back on my career, and there have absolutely been trying times, and there have absolutely been so many successes. So I just don't know many people who pause. You and I are both, roughly the same age. We're midlife for sure. And I don't know how many people pause in midlife to say, look at all I've done, not in just the last 6 months, but through the course of our careers too. Mm-hmm. So for me, an unanticipated gift that's been a part of this larger gift known as Thrive and Shine HR. It's just been so cool. I love it so much. It's so fun.
Same, definitely. And looking forward to this topic being our 21st.
Yes.
And really diving into something that I think, so many of us have either experienced or been caught up in at one time or another. And that's
oh my gosh, micromanaging. And the title's interesting because our title is why this actually isn't the real problem and what is. So I can't wait to actually sink our teeth into this one. So Jen, when you think about micromanagement, what comes to mind? What do you think of? Do you have a definition for it, or what really just pops up for you authentically?
For me, it comes down to a one-word answer in terms of the way that I view micromanaging, and it's
Yeah.
around control and the idea of, an inability to be able to kind of reach an outcome without control. And so, as I was preparing for this, I was really trying to kind of think about like the focus of, individuals who, I've worked with in the past, different leaders in the past, and where I've seen those that I might have represented or indicated in some way that it might have been, a behavior that you could call out as micromanaging. And really for me, that consistency came down to, a strong desire to have control over the outcome. So it's a pretty simple response.
Yes.
It just kind of goes right to the jugular. What about you? When you think micromanagement, what comes up for you?
It's exactly it, control. And then I think you and I see it that way because of all the experience we've had. But then I think about somebody who perhaps is a little, I'll just be very frank, a little bit younger, hasn't been in the HR field for 20 to 30 years. And so micromanaging, just so we're super clear, it's when a manager, micromanagement, somebody I guess it doesn't have to be a manager, but somebody is demanding frequent updates. They're insisting on having the final say. They're overly involved in even just minor decisions that need to be made, and can be really, really almost overly critical of team members' work. And the behavior can just be super stifling, and it can just ultimately erode any trust and really any possibility for innovation and the flourishing of solutions. So I think, it's just being overbearing. And you're right. I think it comes down to control. You're absolutely right. 100%. For sure. What has been the most memorable experience for you professionally that you've had with micromanagement in the workplace?
The most memorable experience I had was early in my career, having a leader who was actually 2 steps above me, but it was someone who I admired greatly when I first started, because she was one of those people who had, like, from outside appearances, everything put together. She had an MBA. She had, kind of all of the pedigree. She, was so, kind of on point in so many ways. But what I noticed as I was working there for about a year and a half is her tendency to not be able to let go on the details. And when she would come into the office and she would be meeting with my manager, the person above us, she needed to kind of have her hand in everything, to the point that then when she would leave and then my manager would be there, I would see repeatedly the wind's taken out of her sails, not feeling as though she had the autonomy to really do what she needed to do. Yet I wasn't necessarily so involved in it that I had the impact that my manager did, whereas my manager wasn't really able to kind of see it at that time. I can kind of look back on that moment and see she was really just experiencing that emotional, like, wind out of your sails type moment, whereas I could really reflect back and see that this particular leader was not really aware of the way that her behavior and her need to be able to kind of control all the details of how X got to Y or how the widgets were made, and her inability to do that ultimately completely, like you said, kind of frailed that relationship. And when my manager ended up leaving about 6-7 months later, I could really be able to kind of clearly see the moments that led up to that, the undermining, the lack of trust, the lack of really belief in the competency and the ability for my leader at that time to be able to navigate effectively. So like you said, it erodes, it deteriorates. And so being able to kind of reflect on that, because I have plenty of experiences I can give where perhaps I may have been treated, in this way, that way, but to be able to see it from, the perspective of that outside person was really something that I'll always take with me, because I will never forget that. And it's always, I think, because I was 22, 23 at the time.
Yeah.
And it's always kind of stayed with me. You know how sometimes if you see a parent who's really, really hard or mean on one of your siblings, this stuff sticks with us, right? Because this is definitely not something that I want to do. And not to say that I've never been caught up at, one time or another where I find myself overly, being stuck on, different details or whatever, but it definitely was enough to kind of shake my cage and say, wait a second, how is this really effective? And how is it really ultimately supporting the outcome that we're attempting to achieve? And both of those things were a complete no-go based on that approach. So yeah, I think that one for me sticks with me. How about you? Do you have an example?
Well, as usual, like I was going to say one thing, but now I'm going to say another, because you inspire me every single time we do an a Thrive and Shine HR. I was just thinking about HR Empower Hour. So I taught a workshop on this class just 2 days ago, on this topic rather, excuse me. And the example you just shared was very much in line with the women who attended the workshop. Mm-hmm. I thought, this is hilarious, I anticipated people coming to the workshop wanting help with, how do I handle people who are coming to complain about a manager who is micromanaging? Because that was my most memorable experience with micromanagement. But what the women actually needed in the workshop, and thank God I know to ask at the beginning of the workshop, kind of, what has your experience been? What do you want to get out of today? And the women were saying, I was micromanaged and I quit. And they wanted to have a little bit of a reframe and heal from that experience, and really understand the root cause that was causing their boss that they quit, because we all know we always quit bosses, the old adage. So I found that to be really, really fascinating. But and we had a great conversation, and everybody walked away with a very, very customized plan. For me, the most memorable experience, so this explains my lens. It was when, this is probably about 5 years ago, it was when an employee came to me and was going on and complaining about their boss who was micromanaging them. My boss micromanages everybody in our department. None of us have any autonomy. We are told what to do. We are under the microscope. We're constantly making mistakes. We're constantly being corrected, grammatically, just all the things. Nobody can do anything right. So that employee leaves my office, and I kid you not, 1 hour later, a coworker of that employee came into my office and said, I am not hearing from my boss. I'm not getting the feedback that I need. I just feel like I'm on an island by myself. So fascinating that 2 employees on the same team were experiencing the same manager completely differently. And that was a massive aha moment for me.
Wow. Yeah.
That micromanagement is subjective. It is subjective. 100% of the time, it takes 2. It's not just about the person doing the managing, it's the recipient of the so-called micromanagement or lack thereof. Really, really, really interesting. And that really impacted me.
Yeah.
Weird?
No, hilarious, but also so powerful, because it's like when you realize I can't think of the actual phrase, but there's something about when somebody is mistreating you, there is a reciprocal piece of you're accepting it, right? Ooh. You know what I'm talking about? I can't remember the words of that, but that's the same idea. It's like
Yes.
any kind of mistreatment, there is a moment where you have allowed that in some way. And so at what point does that accountability factor come in? And most people don't want to talk about that, right?
I
We don't
know.
want to talk about the piece of what we own. But like, you're absolutely right, because especially when you see those circumstances where people will just come in and they'll unload on you and not then recognize their own place in it. It's like, well, at what point, you know? So
Yes.
it's so fascinating. And I really appreciate that you gave that perspective to it, because I agree with you 100%.
Okay, so I have a related question that I didn't prepare. But when kind of going with the line of thought and what you were just sharing, you know, when people come into our offices, when we're in that HR role in the workplace, and people don't realize their own role in whatever interpersonal issue is going on.
Mhm.
I'm just curious how many times you've had, you know, you've asked employees, okay, so what have you done? What action have you taken? How have you advocated for yourself? How often have people been like, yeah, I haven't said anything. I haven't done anything. I'm truly curious how, like, is that as frequent for you in your professional career as it has been for me, where I'm like, oh, well, that's really interesting. You know,
Yeah.
I say that in my own head without saying that out loud.
Yeah, right.
Is it frequent for you? Like, I'm so curious.
It's wildly frequent.
Wild. WF, wildly frequent.
No, it's absolutely frequent, and it's
Wild.
such a fascinating part of human behavior, right? Of what then causes us to get to a point where we've now been stretched that we do speak up. And boy, oh boy, you know, great job to all of us for now finding our voice.
Yes.
But from my perspective, from an HR perspective, it's like 8 or 9 times out of 10, it's going to come, like you said, with an additional reframing of how to help them actually be able to address it on their own. And that's a tool that most people really, really struggle with. And so for me, I've only been in the role that I am in this particular role for about a year. And so I feel like there's progress in that area, but I absolutely agree with you. It's something that people will do over and over again in work environments, home environments, the kids coming to you, you know, the parents with their, you know, solve it. So yeah, I think that that's a super common thing. And I think one of the really wonderful challenges for us in HR is how, one, do we kind of help best support in that situation, so we're not then taking it on, right? We're not kind of feeling that way, but we can help those be able to recognize that they have so much more power, you know, they're so much more empowered. But yeah, it's a challenging one, and yet it's one where I feel like I really love that. I really love how we get into kind of these messy or complicated type things, because it really helps remind me how much more we can do to help serve the greater good.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah,
I love that.
I believe that fully. And so that's like, oh, there's opportunities there.
I know you do. I have one of my clients listens to Thrive and Shine HR podcast religiously, and she's always talking about you and what you share, how you share it, your tonality, that you're very calming, and how intelligent you are. And I just had a moment there where I'm like, I mean, I already know this about you, Jen, but I was like, yeah, like the way you just deliver it is so inspiring and so on point. And it's just that reminder of the why beneath the why, of why many of us go into the HR profession. Like, how can we serve? How can we help? And there's just such a need, and there's just so much opportunity. I freaking love what you just shared. What about like, so kind of going back to control a little bit, I guess my question is, if like micromanagement is not the real problem, right? Because it's maybe that's not the right way to frame this. I mean, what would be the root cause of micromanagement? What would be the real problem? What are we actually trying to solve for? Knowing all that we know about humans and human behavior in the workplace.
Yeah. So, I mean, when I think about that, what I'm really ultimately looking at here is like, what causes individuals to feel as though they need to control all the aspects, right? Like, what causes us to believe that that's necessary? And there's no doubt in my mind it's fear-based. There's no doubt in my mind that it comes from a place of, I need to make sure this is all controlled in order to ensure that I am going to be good enough, that I am, so at the end of the day, every bit of it has to do with an intense fear that whatever it is that I am being attached to with this thing, whether it's the project, whether it's the task, whether it's whatever it is, these sense of that if it's not done in the way that I believe it needs to be done, it's going to reflect badly upon me. And so from that place is really just that insane, intense fear that I'm not enough.
Yep.
Right. And so you can slice and dice and spin and twist it any old fashioned way. But ultimately, anytime we're trying to control things that are really ultimately outside of our control and have no business trying to control,
right,
it has to do with being terrified of how it's going to come back on us.
Right.
What about you? Where do you see it?
Same conclusion. And when we talked about this in HR Empower Hour, what we all deduced it to was self-doubt.
Yeah.
Just absolutely fear-based and self-doubt. Am I doing this right? Am I managing correctly? And not really having the confidence, just being unsure of ourselves as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just that need to control and to be grasping for something that gives us some semblance. And it's actually like a false sense of control, which is so trippy, I think.
Yeah.
But here's something that this happens often. Like, I, of course, think about these topics often because I'm just so fascinated by human behavior. It just intrigues me. I read about behavioral science and neuroscience and all the things all the time. What I hadn't thought about until when you were just talking, Jen, was that the sense of control is coming from the micromanager. But if you think about it, that need for control, the need for control is coming from the recipient as well. The person, think about it that way. Like, that person is trying to say, well, I need to be treated this way, or I need more autonomy. We all, there's so many studies done on one of the basic psychological needs that all humans have is that sense of autonomy. It's the opposite of, of being controlled. We all want to have a say. I guess it's the same. We all want to control. We want to be autonomous so that we can control. But isn't that interesting? I hadn't thought of it until when you were talking, like, it's not just the micromanager, it's everybody wanting to control and be autonomous. What? Whoa. What were you going to say?
And I think you nailed it too, is like, it's just going to be different in any sort of relationship between, two individuals in terms of where they fall on the spectrum around how much control they want to give and take.
What?
Right? I mean, I think that's that didn't occur to me before this episode, but you're absolutely right. There is a contract between everybody and anyone who is leading them. And ultimately, that contract is something that you have to elect to and sign up for. And yeah, when that contract is not working effectively, ultimately that relationship is not effective. So,
oh my God. And now I'm spinning back to last week's episode 20, us versus them. And when you have that us versus them, there's that power struggle for the control versus when you're a we. And what if you're controlling it together?
Yeah.
What if they're like, going back to what you were just saying, it's not a push and pull, it's an ebb and flow. It is that understanding. It's that coming together, and love, safety, and a sense of belonging. It's people wanting to be understood too. Oh my gosh, there's so many layers to this.
There's so much.
Why does this always happen? We start getting into an episode and we're like, oh my gosh, we could talk about this forever. There is so much to this. I love it.
Well, it gives us such great material for the future.
And
in the moment, we're like, what?
I know. It's like, so listeners, do you have about 6 hours? Because this may be a 6-hour episode. So when you think about like, okay, my word is self-doubt. If you deduce it, what is it for you? Is it the same or is it a slightly different?
For me, it's fear. So I think it can fall in a place of self-doubt. It can fall in a place of just scarcity.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it can fall in different places, but it really is like a place of insecurity and
right.
So, but yeah, I think it all kind of relates pretty well. And then,
absolutely,
can be super, super circumstantial. It also can come into play in circumstances where individuals are not feeling as confident and secure in their roles. And then they'll tend to tighten up, that much more, but it may not necessarily be within their natural scope. So people can kind of come in and out of it too. I've seen that before, whereas all of a sudden I was like, who are you? But, there are things that sometimes going on behind the scenes where people all of a sudden kind of feel that need. And ultimately, if there's not, really that safety and not communication, then it's kind of happening. It's kind of happening in this vacuum. And that's the other thing that I've noticed too, which is a whole nother, side topic of, when this is happening or, tends to happen, in certain circumstances rather than, Joe being the manager who's always micromanaging. This can also be something that, as you kind of mentioned earlier, it kind of can be fluid at times where there's times where it kind of is a little bit more, a little bit less. And ultimately people may not have, that consistency of knowing what that, may look like from day to day.
You just blew my mind again. Because when you started talking about fear and that being the root, I am literally flashing back to the last few business days. I've been working as a consultant with several clients who are going through some adversity, some change in the workplace, and they're not necessarily micromanaging people. They're trying to micromanage their schedules, what other people are saying or doing, because they feel they are absolutely coming from fear. And one of my clients has high levels of self-awareness, and she saw it right away. We were doing a coaching session yesterday. She's like, totally coming from fear, like right away. And she was really trying to micromanage a process. She wanted her hands in it. She wanted to control all the other players who are involved. And I'm starting to see how sort of micromanagement of a process came into play this week. Again, you're blowing my mind, Jen. My brain hadn't gone here at all until this recording. And then I have another client who she is trying to manage how others are perceiving her and manage how other people are recognizing her value, which is really interesting. And both of those clients are coming from fear for very, very different reasons. And I just hadn't thought about micromanagement. It's not just necessarily of other people. It applies to so many different facets of life.
That's such a good example, Katherine, because that second one I have been guilty of multiple times throughout my, absolutely I've been guilty of. And I think, when we get to ourselves around those experiences that might feel new and awkward and different, we go back to the episode on change, like that is a prime time where I think subconsciously, many of us kind of latch right into that without even awareness. And so we have to kind of unlatch ourselves from that from time to time when we get ourselves in those positions. So it's like,
Yes.
so interesting that you bring that up, because I think many of us can relate to that when something is kind of shifted and changed. We like, oh, I need to make sure I really got this.
Totally.
And at the same time, when we do that, although the initial intentions might be really good and positive because we're trying to get an initial handle on something, it can definitely go to that point because now we're attaching to the outcome. Right. And so that click that sometimes we may not have really caught can happen like under the surface. And now we've kind of gone, well, too far. But until we can have someone like you or someone else to be able to kind of help us unravel a little bit from that, that can be a hard one to be able to see in the grand scheme of things.
Okay. You just dropped some gold that I just have to highlight for our listeners. That, oh gosh, what did you just say? Oh my gosh, I just lost it. Oh, attachment to the outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Attachment to the outcome. And when I'm thinking about the two clients, it was all about what they wanted the outcome to be, and they felt like they were out of control. Mm-hmm. And they really were. I mean, in both situations, the women could not control what was going on, and they were grasping at the things they thought that they could control and manage. That is wild what you just shared. The attachment to the outcome is a huge contributing factor that I hadn't thought about.
And it's such a contributing factor to like people who can drive themselves into insanity, right? Because they're not really recognizing that may have happened. And I'm guilty of it. Oh. I'm guilty of it for sure. And so
I'm so guilty of it. Yes.
Yeah. So this conversation, even as we're talking about it, is a good reminder. I'm like, ooh, Jen. It's something I even have going on at work right now. I'm like, you better check in on that. Because, like we're saying, it's this micromanaging piece, I think, can come up. And although so much of our dialogue and conversations tend to be around that leader to employee dynamic. Yeah. I so appreciate the way that you broaden this out for us, because this is truly where it comes down to. It's within all of us. It's within all, it's all over the place. And it really does have to do with that control of trying to believe that we have the power to control these outcomes. We do not.
We do not. Well, that leads right into another really good question. So if fear's the real problem, right? How do we in HR successfully address that real problem? Like, I think it's one thing when we recognize it in ourselves. Like, I think you and I have been through enough, and also we have those coaching skills to have that awareness. But as an HR consultant in my case, and as an HR director in your case, how do we actually help people? Like, because I don't think we can say, I mean, for some of my clients, I can literally say, do you feel like you're coming from fear? I mean, I can be super direct with the clients I've worked with for years because we've had so many conversations about fear. But how do you do it? Have you had success, and how do you do it?
Normalizing talking about struggle, normalizing talking about difficulties. I think it's the normalization in how we talk about this stuff, because I know where I work and most places we've seen progress. We can applaud the progress, but people still are not talking, and they're waiting until we get to the explosions, or we're waiting till we get to the point, and we talked about this in the burnout overwhelm episode, we're waiting to the point where it finally is too much. And I think this is the same thing as like, what is it we're holding on to or having a difficult time with letting go? Many times, for many of us, even myself included, I may not always be fully conscious of it until now it's a problem. Until now it's reached a level of discomfort. So I don't know that I have the full answer on that, because I think it's one of those things that continues to kind of be an evolving landmine in so many ways. But I do think that one of the things that I know has worked for me and will continue to be so will be the like calling out what's present versus push away, hide away, move on, snuff it, stuff and snuff. All of that has really made a tremendous difference for me. And so with that has kind of comes in once you do find the release and it's now out there, right? Having the courage to actually do something about it. Does it mean delegating? Does it mean documenting? Does it mean so that's the other part of this that I think will drive me a little nuts sometimes in working in HR is, recognizing, especially in those who may struggle with this either with themselves or with people they work with, and they will finally get to a point where we get it out and then it goes nowhere. Is there nothing for you that like can be more of a greater pet peeve? I know for me it is. It's like, we have talked about this. So it's really like a matter of like, if this matters to you, if this matters to us, let's do more than just talk about it. Let's do more than just normalizing and getting this out on the floor. Let's actually put some action to it and move in a direction that includes ensuring people are heard, people, like all the things can get out there in a way that feels effective for everyone involved. And so, the two things are really normalizing the communication and then the follow through and action. What about you? Where do you go with it?
I'm just always in awe of your articulation, and you've had so many mic drops tonight. I've lost count of how many you have had. What you just shared is incredible. It's so on point. That normalization, it's everything. And you and I have talked about in past episodes how we HR, if that's a verb, we HR so differently now than we did in the 90s. I mean, it is just a different era. Mm-hmm. And for me, you hit the nail on the head. And the way I phrase it and how it comes up in my brain is EQ, is emotional intelligence, and normalizing talking about emotional intelligence and being comfortable with saying, for you and I think it takes practice, maybe for some younger HR professionals, maybe it's not the case, but I'm just guessing here. Asking the question of, how are you feeling? Like, talk to me about the feelings that are coming up for you. And then what I do, and again, I'm reflecting back on two very, very fresh in my mind experiences I had this week as a consultant. With the one woman, she and I talk about EQ all the time. And what I teach in HR and Power Hour and with my one-on-one clients is TQ, the power of our thoughts, and that our thoughts inform our feelings inform our behaviors, and our behaviors inform our results. So when I have that rapport with somebody and we've had long-standing conversations that our thoughts are informing our feelings. So if you're feeling fear, really give some thought to, what are you thinking about? Mm-hmm. And I did have really a huge successful moment with a client yesterday who came clean to herself, not necessarily to me. I was just coaching. I was prompting her to think deeply. Okay, what thoughts are you choosing that are causing you to feel that fear? Mm-hmm. And they're literally thoughts of, well, this administration, this person has so much power. I could get fired at any point. That's fear.
That's going to put fear in you.
That's going to put fear in you, right? Where your focus goes, your energy flows 100% of the time. So I had a lot of success. And then with my other person, not so much. I think there's a lack of emotional intelligence, also self-awareness. So I think those are some things that as HR practitioners, when we normalize those conversations about EQ and about TQ and about self-awareness, and when we start to develop the skills around curiosity, self-curiosity of our thoughts, curiosity of other people's thoughts, developing those skills of resiliency, the skill of courage. I love how you talk about courage all the time. I mean, talk about the antidote to fear. Boom. I love that C word. There are just so many things that we can normalize and bring into the workplace, and not only say, hey, it's actually okay to talk about it, to do that, and then to teach the requisite skills that serve as the antidote to fear, like courage. Like, I just think so many of us think the workplace is not the right place to be teaching the skills of curiosity and courage and resiliency. That's the normalization you're talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think there is still such a stigma around that, around, is the workplace the right place?
Boom.
And that is something that I debate even, people I work with currently, because that's a tricky one. And in terms of the responsibilities that we can have that could have an impact, I think these conversations are really, really worth having and continuing to have, and hopefully finding some normalizing of that, because right now there's still a lot of pushback around that, around, well, no, the workplace is not a place to really be talking about, courage and resilience and these types of things. It's like, is it? Isn't it? But I think it's just, we are still kind of at this, pushing the envelope type of place, and so we just need to keep talking and having the conversations that we do. And I believe that it's finding its way. But it is interesting. It's interesting, here we are in 2024 still having conversations in our workplaces where we're not really recognizing how much impact we can have by being the leaders and talking about these things. So
Right.
It's interesting.
It's so interesting. Yeah. And as our profession and the HR space continues to evolve and change, I just have such high hopes. And the sooner we can see the impact, and whether, we have to speak to our boss, if our boss is more numbers based and metric based versus heart based, just really understanding how to speak to the importance of the awareness and the inclusion and the acceptance of all of these types of normalization of discussions and skills, et cetera. How do you, if there is resistance, whether it's resistance within ourselves, or, if there's a lack of willingness on leadership's part to say, yes, this should be a 2025 goal of HR, run with it, whatever that looks like. How do we be smarter in how we approach people who have the final say with budgetary approval or strategic direction or what have you, if it's not us, right? So I think that's gosh, a whole other episode, Jen. Look at that.
I'm like, that's a great question.
Here we go again.
Yeah, because as we know, it always starts at the top. And so if, you're not seeing those behaviors being emulated and modeled at the top, good luck. And how can we, be able to kind of help support in that, or anyone to be able to, recognize the work that would need to be done in that type of scenario. Yeah, that's a challenge, right? Because we do not have the power to control others, and especially those who are at the, the decision maker levels. And so, it's a tricky thing. We can only do so much, and we can continue to kind of show up in the way that we, want to be able to do that impact making as best we can. But ultimately, it's got to rest at the top, and there has to be a buy-in that sometimes we have to recognize what is and is not possible.
Right. Right. What are we dealing with? And what is and what is not possible? Like, what is the reality of it? Yeah. And I've definitely had so many clients who are just ready to work with a progressive leadership team, and no right or wrong. They're just working with a leadership team or an executive team who just continues to practice traditional business approaches, traditional management approaches, traditional leadership approaches. And it's the antithesis of what, you and I have been sharing is sort of the secret sauce, and what is going to help organizations be progressive. So you have options there too. You know, do you stick with it and say, I am the right person to be the change agent in the organization? Or is that wall just so high and so thick? And if this is something that just really lands with you, that you know this is true, yeah. What do you do with that? Do you go seek a different organization? Yeah.
Right. And like the people who came on, HR Empower Hour that said, hey, I broke free, I got away, and having like that success, quote unquote, success story around what we've been through, and then be able to really recognize like why we would take such action to make that kind of difference. And then how do we help support those who may be in, similar situations to really be able to like make a different choice that could have an impact, but also knowing where their line is, where that boundary is. And that's something I think through, what you provide and, as best as we can through this podcast is, giving, our people the tools and, the awareness to be able to ultimately make a decision that's going to be the best for them.
Absolutely. I mean, and speaking of which, do you have any specific advice for our listeners? Anything like super specific? I know we've covered so much more ground than I initially thought this topic would afford. It's been so fun as usual, but do you have any specific advice?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best thing that I can offer of anybody who might be in a situation that they're really struggling with micromanagement, whether it be, through direct leadership or within their organization, is being able to find a way to be able to talk that through with a trusted advisor, support. I think a lot of times, especially our HR departments, that can feel so isolating, and it can feel so constrictive that a lot of times I've seen, and I've worked with people who have been in those scenarios for years and years, and finally got to the point that they escaped, but really ultimately they kind of built up to the point where it literally was no other option, for them. And so I think ultimately what I would love to see, and I know you would love to see, is to really be able to help people proactively as best as we could throughout, so people don't feel stuck. And that's a tough thing. And I think however that outreach looks like, whether it's coaching and whether it's, additional HR groups and Empower Hour, just being able to find those support areas that really can help us work through those things, because sometimes when we're so close to it, it's so difficult to be able to see.
Absolutely. And gosh, you're so right. It's like that old exercise. I don't know if that's the right word, but when you try and look at your nose, it's so, without a mirror, it's so close you can't see it. And I think that's a great analogy for our listeners, that sometimes when it's so close, you're just in it, and all you're seeing is they're micromanaging, taking that step back, right? Mm-hmm. The irony, looking in the mirror a little bit too, that's a whole other episode as well. But just taking that step back and saying, okay, I learned that it comes from fear. So not cool, but good to know my boss or the person who's micromanaging me is coming from fear. I'm not saying that it's okay for somebody to continue with behavior that's not working for you. But I think it's just that very first step is that awareness and that acknowledgement. Some people stop there and they're like, I see the human in them. I see they're coming from fear. I get it. I get it. I can deal with this. It's fine. Or they shift their approach, right? They either shift their mindset or their approach, because they understand the person's coming from fear, and it's not personal. Mm-hmm. It's just what's going on in that person's brain. Other clients I've had are like, yeah, I understand that. I understand it's coming from self-doubt. It's coming from fear. It's that need for control, whatever it is. And I'm really not okay with it. Great. Whatever that decision is for you, you're going to know. Your body tells you this is right for me. And I think it's just kind of tying it into what you talked about earlier today, just paying attention to what our bodies are telling us.
Yeah, I love that so much though, because like that's such a great way of like really checking in with yourself of like, how do you really feel about this? Because we were talking about earlier, like ultimately, regardless of what other people, what society says around these circumstances, how do you feel? Like, how is it making you feel? And how is it something yeah, because by doing that, by bringing that awareness within yourself, you can then be able to act and move from a place that's more authentic. Ooh, Katherine, I love what you just said so much, because I think that could be so empowering for so many out there, just starting right there.
Yeah. But you just knocked it out of the park.
You did.
So eloquently do. We as a team, not us versus them, not Jen versus Kathy. I think I know this episode has helped me. I'm going to listen back to it because I got a lot out of this episode today. Jen, you just have such a calm demeanor and such intelligence and such a way of articulating things that hit me so hard in such a empowering and inspiring way. So thank you for all that you shared today. It's always a pleasure, but today, for some reason, I think maybe because of all the things that I've been experiencing in the workplace this week, this really hit me in a very amazing way. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I always feel so inspired talking with you too. And like the ideas that we're able to come together, I never would be able to come up with on my own. So I'm going to rewatch as well, because, being 21 episodes in, and I feel like it was as fresh as a new day. So it
absolutely
was
love it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, for our listeners out there, if you loved it as much as Jen and I did, you want to watch it again, feel free. But just always know that you are welcome to share this episode with anyone you want to share it with. Please, we just would love it if you would rate, review, subscribe, all the things to help other people to pay it forward in their profession. Yeah. What did you say?
And share with a friend.
Share with a friend. Share with your HR bestie. That's what Jen and I do all the time. All right. Thanks for joining us today. And just remember that every single day, every day is a great day to thrive and shine in HR. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.